security and this idea that it's pretty much difficult or impossible to secure anything these days. And in our pre-conference chat, we talked about passwords and why the idea of passwords are kind of a joke. So I'm going to ask each of them to talk about their view of passwords as we talk about this idea of how you secure the perimeter. Because I think what each of them has to say about it and how they approach it is extremely interesting. So, Ajay, why don't you start?
Hey, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, in terms of passwords, I think it's actually reflective of a greater issue that's actually happening in the world today. The idea of whether passwords are good enough or not to protect the important information assets that you have as a consumer, as a part of the enterprise, or whatever. So if you think about it, in the last year alone, I read somewhere that there's probably more breaches in the last year than there have in the last 5. So obviously what's been happening is that we've been trying to solve the problems of data security as there are more and more breaches in the same way, and it's not helping. So 10 years ago, systems were a lot more under control, and in the enterprise, there used to be something that resembled a perimeter. So anytime there was data breach, generally the reaction was that, okay, we have perimeters, we have walls around the enterprise, let's see what we can do to go ahead and, when there's a breach, a data loss, let's close a hole in the perimeter and let's reinforce the wall. And now what's happening is that the number of data loss vectors in the enterprise in the world have just exploded. And the ability to be able to close those holes is just not keeping up with the amount of breaches. So the idea of saying, okay, let's repeat what we've been doing for the last 30 years and try to reinforce these non-existing and crumbling walls isn't going to work. And the idea that a password, even a password that has multiple factors to it, where there is a person in the loop or where the password can be breached or passed along as your security mechanism it's kind of a joke, right? So in a world now with no borders and enterprises without any perimeters, with mobile, BYOD, cloud sharing, personal email, just basically the power is put in anyone's hands to just seamlessly and very easily be able to share data wherever it goes. And once data leaves your purview of control, it basically goes into a black hole. So essentially what's happened is the new perimeter is not the enterprise wall or anything else. The new perimeter is what is you're trying to protect in the first place, which is your data. So you have to perimeterize, I'm going to make up a word, or secure that which is important to you, which is the data itself. So I think the idea that there's one or more factors in the form of a password or whatever it is that's going to protect all your data everywhere, that's just not a tenable or scalable situation. You have to take security, policy, control, attach it to the data, follow that data wherever it goes, and have visibility and control over it. And because in the world today, there's no more endpoints. There are no more walls. And so, just in essence, I think passwords, they had their day, but they're just not enough. They're just not enough.
Michelle.
Yeah, I think I'll key off of that. I think it's a one-trick pony to think, challenge and something that you've remembered. It's too textured now. We know everybody's using things that they can remember because it's such a noisy environment anyway. So when I look at it as a design challenge, you've got a piece of plastic, it's something that you have, you've got something that needs to be memorable, something that you know, and that's where we've been. But we also are using the same hammer and pretending everything is a nail, when really you can have a wink pass thing, I'm already got my band, I got my tag to get into Coalition, maybe I wink to get into the enterprise stage. Maybe that's sufficient. Maybe you have something that's a lot heavier when you're buying a home. But I think the point is that as soon as we kind of clear the technology off the deck, and we sell a little bit of technology at Intel, so I like technology too, but I think once you clear that off the decks, you don't get into is it a phone? Is it a phablet? Is it a tablet? Are we back to PCs and clamshells again? Instead, it's data. And just like we stopped looking at having to possess lump metal gold that came out of the earth. We were able to substitute data to be a proxy. So we need to do that same data substitution for what we have, what we know, what we are entitled to do in a time-based, currency-like context.
So what you're talking about are certificates or some other way to validate that I'm allowed to have access to this data or this network or this information, what have you, and then it times out. Is that right?
You can have a certificate today. I mean, that's kind of using today's tools, which I love all day long.
But tell me what tomorrow's...
I think tomorrow is we will have, instead of having giant databases or giant data stores, I think we'll have like kind of database-lets. So along the network, along the way, that will know the context, right? So we still will be present on the dirt. It will say, certain things are geographically based. When I want to walk into this store and have this kind of activity, perhaps my data let will be here. Maybe it's a smart card I stick in there and it reads a chip. Maybe it's a cert that I attest to. Trying to get away from that password though. Maybe we're continuing to use facial for a little while until we figure out how the bad guys can kind of start defragging that one. But I think it is a matter of really first focusing on the time that's necessary for that entitlement, and then figuring out how dire, what's the priority, what's the risk scale of that asset. And then we figure out how many layers of penetration, how many dual keys. Is it a one-person handshake, or is it a machine analytic that just kind of checks out what kind of activity's in the air and says, you're the 50th person in Starbucks. Maybe you can't get in until the 51st leaves the door. So I think that's where we're going. We're looking at time, we're looking at data flow, and we're looking at contextual cues rather than, I think what you're hearing most of the buzz around big data, trying to spy on Connie. What is Connie doing? Like, that's kind of annoying and icky. So instead, let's figure out a Connie-like object and where she is and what she might want to do today. I think that's where we're going.
So Ajay, this is a problem that obviously you have spent a lot of time thinking about, which is why you started your company. You have an approach. You think that it's possible to move the password protection or the protection from the individual and the password to the data itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think when in the world we're living today, again, without any borders or any perimeters, it's the only way you can do it. You have to apply those protections to the data, and it's not just access. Access is only one part of it. So imagine I take a piece of data and I go through whatever mechanisms there are to be able to validate someone has access to that data. Now it gets on their endpoint, on their mobile device, on their laptop. As soon as it gets there, then what? They can copy and paste from it, they can print screen, they can take screenshots. And even just a user that doesn't have any bad intentions can do things that can put that data at risk. So the idea needs to be is that it's not just about access, but it's also, once you get that data anywhere, what can you do with that data? So there has to be beyond that. So think about it today, right now there is laptops, there's mobile devices, there's desktops. Tomorrow there is, everything is internet enabled. So I looked at and talked to people in security saying that certain environments will have the most lockdown environments there are. Someone walks in with an Android watch that has a camera on it, and all of a sudden a hacker gets in and is able to look at an entire board meeting that's happened. This has actually happened, right? There's too many vectors of attack, there's too many devices, and that you have to not only control access to the data in some strong way, in the manner that you were speaking about, but then also once you get access to that data, it just doesn't end there. You have to be able to control what can and cannot happen to that data, and you have to be able to change what can and cannot happen to that data in real time. And by the way, what adds another layer of complexity to this whole problem is that users they don't deal well with friction. You know, if you get in the way of their data, they're going to figure out a way to get to it. So you not only need to have an impenetrable kind of security when it comes to data, but it also has to be invisible now. So the user it doesn't impact their flow. It's a tall order, but the last 30 years was all about IT being in control and putting up walls and putting up friction. The next 30 years, I believe this very strongly, is tearing those walls down, making it frictionless, and yet providing the same level of security or better levels of security around that data. That's the challenge that's before, whether it is it's big companies like Intel or it's startups like us.
So what it sounds like you're both saying is that the idea of a perimeter is an outdated concept today, that there are no perimeters, or if you think about it in those terms, you're already going to be in trouble.
Yeah, there's use cases. So I think the use case is really the perimeter, and what we're talking about is something, there's a guy named Jeffrey Ritter at Oxford and Johns Hopkins who calls what Ajay is talking about quantum data. So getting it down to the actual data transaction of Bob and Alice, and understanding that transaction, that use case. That's the new perimeter, if you will. It's more like a vector than a perimeter anymore. There's nothing inside a container anymore that can't be let out.
I think we got to just basically abandon the idea of walls altogether, honestly. I mean, the idea of just even thinking about a perimeter, it doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, it's a completely different world. You got to, when you do startup, you have to just start with, or any idea, you start with a clean slate. Say, here's the problem that we need to solve, here's the context in which we need to solve it. So I don't think the future is hopeless. I think in terms of data security that there'll always be breaches. We're not, there's not some kind of state of brutal nadir that's out there that we're all subject to. In the valley from where I come from, Silicon Valley, this is just a bed of opportunity. Anytime there is these kind of problems at scale, there will be intelligent people going and solving them. But then there will be hackers that will try to find holes in it, and it's this continuous loop. And
so we have an audience who's interested in understanding how to secure their information, their personal data, their company info. You're at a place of business and they have some sort of security protocol in place. What's the question that they should be asking? How do they know they already need to change? What is the warning point, I guess?
So a red flag for me is always, the answer to the first question is always, what's your data and where's your data? And typically what you get back is the picture with the cans and the arrows and the cloud. It's adorable. They don't know what that data is. So that's red flag number one, you don't really know your data. So really going and saying, okay, IT, I'm coming back to you later. Security guys, I'm coming back to you later. I'm going to the head of marketing, I'm going to HR, I'm going to the sales guys and saying, what information drives your business? What information can you not live without? What's your source? That's where you find out about all the rogue Amazon stuff going on. That's where you find out how dependent you are on Salesforce. That's how you find out that half of your IT people creating your IT are completely pissed off and you need to buy more pizza. Then you figure out what are the things that I start to protect and when and why and how. But it starts with, if you don't know where your data asset is, and I do call it an asset in the most broad way. I don't really mean it as a proxy for currency only. It brings brand value as well as monetary value.
Okay, so Michelle, know where your data is, know where it's stored.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in today's world, I think every company has to realize that no matter what company, no matter what business you're in, you have to be a data security company now. Ask Amy Pascal over at Sony Media Entertainment. Hard Rock Cafe just the other day got breached. We're seeing, obviously there's companies in traditional spaces that have always worried about data security, but it's completely snowballed. People are scared to death because every company, the intellectual property that you have, it's no longer some guy 5 levels removed at some private equity fund who you don't care about's had the breach. Now it's getting extremely personal. It's emails, it's your thoughts, it's people's pictures. Everything is subject to it. It doesn't matter what company you are, you have to come to the realization that you must be a data security company if you want to protect your assets. So I think if you as a company don't think that you're at risk, you're living 5 years ago. That train has left the station. Now you have to, instead of being reactive, you got to be proactive to it. And so it's up to vendors like us and people to offer solutions to these problems to not just the hedge funds of the world, but to the mom and pop shops that are out there that are creating things and their data is out there. So that's the challenge.
You brought up an interesting point. There have been a lot of hacks over the last couple of years. Certainly, last year was a big year for data breaches, but really I think the turning point, at least even in our newsroom, was the Sony hack, because it did take it to a personal level. A lot of people who think that their company data, yes, is important and valuable, all that might get hacked, but now you've got my emails or my social security number. So I'm just curious for each of you, what do you think? And certainly we had Obama in Silicon Valley talking about cybersecurity at Stanford not too long ago, but what do you think was the moment? Was Sony the moment, or is there still a moment to come before things really dramatically change in terms of the adoption of new kinds of security tech?
I would love to say that we've had the moment. I don't think we've had the moment. I think things got back to business as usual really quickly. We are talking about it more. It is in the press more often. It's become a story more often. I think that's good. I think the awareness that emails and things that are about you and not just someone else helps to start personalize the problem. But until we get down to the point and we kind of get into our heads that just because you're not a fireman doesn't mean you don't need to know where the exit is when the flames go up in your hotel room at night. You got to have some personal responsibility. We have to mark those exits clearly. We have to make the technology easier to use. But I'm not really sure if Target didn't do it, if Aetna didn't do it, if Sony didn't do it, if crazy Edward Snowden didn't do it. I'm not sure what it's going to take.
I mean, that's a very good point. But what I'm seeing is, I think the moment really, a lot of it had to do with not just Sony, not just Target, not just Home Depot. What it crystallizes is when it became personal to the C-level execs. So as soon as they realized that they couldn't just point to some guy 6 levels down in IT and make it go away, when they realized that it is the CIO, the CFO, the CEO that has a gun to their head, and it's their job at risk when the bottom line, when there's a breach and it's tweeted out and the share price gets hit, when it hits people's pockets, their pocketbook, when it affects their reputation, as it did with Amy Pascal, when it affects their bottom line, and when indeed it affects their job, that's when they got scared. And I think that there was this watershed moment. I do think there was a watershed moment about that time, and we saw a massive uptick in people trying to get out there and find new solutions. Now, I don't know how long-lived it might be. It might be very reactive for a short period of time. But RSA was in San Francisco, biggest security conference, in the U.S. a couple weeks ago. I've gone for many years. This was the largest by far, and it was the broadest number of companies there, and the highest number of C-level execs there. So I think people are scared, but I think that there is definitely hope. I think there's some really good technologies that are coming out that are proactive as opposed to reactive to solving this problem. So I don't think we're in any state where there's not a disrepair.
Yeah, but I want to add on that real quick, if you don't mind. I think a fire and fear gets you running. That doesn't make you cardiovascularly okay. I think being delighted by the result of the time it takes to be a customer-friendly, an attractive place for employees, a means of delighting people through information-based services, that to me, that greed element and the desire to innovate and create something beautiful and new, I think that is the moment. Once we realize that it's information driving that forward, I think fear may get you out of the building. I think that delight will get you in shape.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Michelle.
That goes fast.
Ajay,
Thank you so much.
thank you for joining us.